Hi, Berklee Film Series. Thank you for coming and watching Trust Me. My name is Charlotte, and I'm a part of the board.
I'm Zach, and I am also a member.
And hello to all at Berklee. My name is Rosemary Smith. I'm the managing director for the Montana-based Getting Better Foundation and the impact producer behind Trust Me documentary.
Thank you so much for doing an interview with us, Rosemary. The first question we have is, as an impact producer, what is your main job with the film?
Oh, well, thanks for asking, Charlotte. As an impact producer, actually, I started with the Getting Better Foundation to bring awareness to people's need for media literacy. So we support teachers getting certified to become media literacy educators in schools. That's kind of where our mission started. And then we started building this advisory board who said, but how are you going to get the message out to the masses? To the people my generation who are not going back to school necessarily, but then also to support you as adolescents in your journey on how to navigate this new media. So the CEO of the Getting Better Foundation, Joe Phelps, and I went to Hollywood. And we decided we're going to just go find a Hollywood director who will embrace media literacy and agree to film stories about how media literacy or a lack of it has led to crises. So my first role as impact producer was more or less as an executive producer with Joe, a co-producer, where we hired a director, where we then hired a producer who would help us research the stories. We hired an editor, Michael Falavalita, who was Jurassic Park's editor. And then as we put together the film, my role moved toward researching stories and helping line up interviews, and then aligning with experts in the field. Now that the film has been produced, my role is strictly distribution and licensing the film to universities, colleges, government organizations and corporations and high schools who will spread the message to the masses. So my impact role, producer role, is more of that, is creating impact with the film, um, generating conversations with people like yourselves who will then share the messaging and the positive and nonpartisan messaging with your peers. A lot longer answer than you were probably looking for,
No,
Charlotte.
that's awesome. No, that's great.
So you bring up the importance of educating the current generation as well as the previous generation on these topics. Have you noticed a shift in, I guess, the public psyche since you've started distributing this amongst those different demographics?
Well, first of all, Zachary, we are a very small team. So the shift just from, trust me, yes, we get to witness the aha moments when students and parents and grandparents and even corporate executives watch the movie, because they before watching, and we've done pre and post surveys and evaluations of the impact of the, not just the film, but our curriculum and collegiate study guide, which I think you have a copy of, written by News Literacy Project. And so we get to see those aha moments before filming, before screening the film. We get to interact with students and say, what is your knowledge of media literacy? What is your knowledge of fake news? Have you been manipulated before? And most often, it's astounding to me that all over the world, the answer is the same. Fake news, who falls for that crap? What are they, dummies or something? And if they do, what's the big deal? Maybe they got bullied a little bit. They'll have, there's psychologists for that. So there's a perception, a misperception, that this is not really a big deal. So by showing the film and by sharing stories, parents nearly losing their young son because of anti-vax information they found online, parents who actually lost a beautiful, healthy, innocent young man because of due to a lynching, because of misinformation on WhatsApp. So you see oh, that could have happened to me, could have happened to my family. Now my mind is open to what can I do about it? And that's when we're asking you to listen to the experts, share some of those resources. So that's probably the most important messaging that we can share with you is the perception after the film. Then we ask those same questions and people are like, what can I do? So that's when we want to share those resources that you can find on our Getting Better Foundation page. That answer your question, okay, Zachary?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, one of my kind of aha moments was towards the end of the film when a reporter was talking about how like what we see in the news is just a small part of what's going on in the world and how it's easy to focus on a lot of the negative news.
Yeah.
So why was this included in the film exactly if it's about misinformation and instead we talked about kind of that part of the news?
Oh, great question. Because media literacy is more than just fake news. There is a lot of mis and disinformation out there, and we want to make sure that when you're basing your important life decisions, who to vote for, and by the way, today is National Voter Registration Day. Make sure that it's really easy to register. Look online, see where you're registered to vote. If you're not, register. So make sure your voice is heard. We want to hear from the young people of our world. So media literacy is more than just mis and disinformation. It's how to analyze news critically to find the information that's important in making our life decisions. Who to vote for that aligns with our values. Can't tell you how many young people, especially that I've met, that said, I'm voting for this guy because, or gal, because they're going to protect my blah, 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 whatever is important to them, right? And then I say, okay, let's research their platform. And they find that they're not aligned with their values. And they're voting for not just a person, but maybe an issue in their community, a water issue, an environmental issue, whatever that's important to their community. And because of the language in there, and because they didn't read up on it, maybe they're voting with something against what they believe in. So it's really critical to be able to analyze information and use it to make those important life decisions, like you saw in the film, medical information, nutritional, financial. So media literacy is the ability to analyze those details. And as you saw from Jeffrey Gettleman, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. His job is to bring awareness of these negative issues, possibly, sometimes positive, but most of the time, journalists are investigating a problem. So they want to bring awareness to that problem because they're solutions driven, right? We want to report on the plane that crashed because there was an issue. It was a pilot error. Was it a part that failed? Was it something in the instruction manual, right? That wasn't communicated properly that caused the crash. So only in identifying those problems can we then look for solutions. Oh, it was a part that failed. We have to go back to the manufacturer and make sure that, their processes are, so the fact that we hear those stories over and over and over again affects us mentally, physically. And so we could hear that story once, right? And we can get it. But if we're subjected to it over and over and over again, it's creating trauma. It's actually creating societal trauma. And when we recognize that trauma is a psychological problem, we have to heal it. The only way to heal it is sometimes medicine, but cognitive behavior therapy. So we look at, trust me, as CBT for the masses, learn how to consume media and how to create media that's not causing more trauma. That
Yeah,
answer.
that's a great point. I
Okay.
feel like so many people get news fatigue and then they end up just kind of being like, I'm just not gonna engage with it. So it's a great solution to kind of just like you said, look at it from a broader scope. But yeah, thank you.
Great summary. I could have said it in less words.
Oh, thanks.
So you just brought up the importance of the news outlets creating information that we can trust. But the documentary brings up the fact that there's money to be made in misinformation. And so I guess my question is, what can we do as consumers to, I guess, mitigate that that profit that the misinformation
Yeah.
companies are making? How can we discern what's true and what's not when we don't have all the time in the day to do extensive research into every news article that comes across our timeline or our phones or whatever's being reported?
First and foremost is awareness. Awareness of the fact that we can be manipulated online. And this is nothing new, Zach. This is something that humans have been dealing with since the advent of the printing press, right? The newspaper was not always accurate. You always saw, but it necessarily wasn't bad. It was bringing awareness to issues, but it was most often trustworthy or at least somewhat trustworthy. Um, in before the 70s and 80s, we had what we call the fairness doctrine in the United States. My husband and I were in broadcasting. I'm a former broadcaster, and our radio stations practiced the fairness doctrine long after it was done away with. We did away with it in our country. What the fairness doctrine did primarily was make sure all sides were represented. And as a journalist, not only did I represent all sides and interview all the different perspectives, but I stayed out of it. I didn't, force my opinion on the subject. I asked those that were most involved and who had the most knowledge of the subject to report on it. And in that manner, we got perspective, right? We got all kinds of opinions and all kinds of viewpoints. And then we can make our own opinion up based on who we thought aligned with our values again. And then the advent of radio sped up that news cycle. The advent of television on demand, we could turn on the television and watch at least until midnight or 10 o'clock before they shut the television waves off. That actually happened. Now it's 24/7. And now with the advent of the internet, you guys especially don't have a mechanism to unplug. It's 24/7. If you take this thing to bed with you, even if it's not on, you're hearing the dinging, you might have shut off your notifications, but who knows what kind of waves are in this thing, right? We want media literacy is all about how to even the accurate information to be able to pull what's important to you and disregard the rest. Learn who credible news sources are and have those primarily in your feed. But you can go to our resources page. All this is free at gettingbetterfoundation.org. There are organizations like Adfantes Media, who's created a media bias chart. So you can plug in it's all interactive. You can plug in who you listen to as far as news sources and say, oh, maybe I'm skewing a little conservative. Maybe I should listen to some more liberal voices. Or maybe I should listen to voices that are more at the pinnacle, who are trying to report on, nobody's unbiased, but trying to report as unbiased as possible. So there are sources, and you do have to do a little homework at first. You do have to kind of vet out, and it's a process. But once you learn media literacy, it's really hard to forget. Like my brother is kind of he's brilliant. He's an engineer literally an engineer for NASA. but he was reading some of these sensational news stories, and now he sends them to me. Is this true? Is this? I'm like his fact checker, right? Because he could get, we could all get led a little bit to one side or the other if we're not careful. So the onus is on us right now, until we have a better procedure for discerning factual news. And the onus is on us to protect ourselves and to make sure that we're remaining trustworthy ourselves, protecting our reputation when we share that news.
Thank you. That was great. Um, One other question about misinformation, and specifically, this film came out in 2022 or was premiered in 2022, which was kind of still in our pandemic era. So, how do you think, since you talked about vaccines in the film, how do you think that possibly affected people's outlook on vaccine and misinformation surrounding that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We had all the footage filmed right before lockdown. So we actually edited the film during COVID, and we had no theatrical release, so there was no movie theaters that were open that we could have a big, screening and a big red carpet event or anything like that, sadly. But what it did was it allowed us to share some of our footage with librarians, superintendents, college presidents, parents, and we asked them, should we go back and now film the tetanus episode and insert COVID more in there? Like at the end of the film, we have the nurses being welcomed and applauded for their work during COVID. So we have the positive in there, but we didn't film the dark side of COVID. The material in the film gets a little dark. And I don't know about you, but by the time we start talking positivity and resources and what can we do about this, I'm ready for that, right? I'm a parent who dealt with adolescent anxiety, depression, and suicide. I don't really want to have to relive that over again and traumatize myself some more. So I was really ready for the positivity and the solutions. But the librarians especially very vocally told us, don't put COVID in there, because if your goal is to lessen polarization, we're fighting over whether to wear masks in school, right? We don't want to fight and have students go home to their parents and say, hey, these people are telling me that we should get vaccinated, or these people are telling me I shouldn't get vaccinated. We don't want to indoctrinate students. We want to empower them with critical thinking. So when we show the segment about tetanus, it allows you to make the leap yourself. Okay, if I don't want to get tetanus, I step on a nail, what do? I can go get a shot. It's going to hurt my arm a little bit, right? My arm might be sore for a few days, but I'm not going to go through that tetanus thing and go into a coma, so, or die. So you can make that leap yourself. It's a choice. If we showed the tetanus episode, I think it would have been more polarizing. Our goal is to bring people together, feed them with credible information, allow them to overlook differences in opinions, to work on solutions to the bigger problems that we face. If we're fighting about whether or not I should get a vaccination, I can't really overcome that animosity toward you to be able to collaborate on something that we probably both agree on, maybe the environment, maybe poverty, maybe famine. Maybe there's things that you and I can work on together that we can't if we are like, oh, that guy's an idiot, he didn't get vaccinated. Or she's a dummy because she did get vaccinated and believed party life, right? It's kind of a stupid argument. Let people make their own minds up, and let's get on with solving the real problems our world faces.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. But
So you had brought up a relative of yours who turns to you for like fact checking purposes. And I was curious, How have you gone about, and more importantly, I guess, how can we as a club, a society, and just, yeah, as people go about teaching our own relatives or friends who may have fallen victim to misinformation and now they can't accept anything that doesn't fall within their narrative? How can we, I guess, grow as a society and learn to be more scrutinous with our information and not necessarily just fall victim to that confirmation bias that was brought up within the documentary?
Yeah, you guys have a tough course. Because it's so easy, like you said, I want to teach them what's right. So what is that? What is that? If I want to teach somebody what is right, that's what is right in my opinion, right? You might have a different opinion, but you might be right about things that I'm not right about. I know that's mind-blowing. We're not always right. How we can build bridges with people who differ in opinion from us is to be more curious instead of furious. A friend of mine, Monica Guzman, wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That Way. Great book. There's a few different reading resources on that Getting Better Foundation org resource page. A lot of books that are authored by our advisory board members. And I never thought of it that way. And being curious, Zachary, I'm curious. How did you come to that opinion?
Through what I've seen within the media, and like I'm not oblivious to the fact that I do have my own confirmation biases and stuff like that. I guess my question was more so just at the end of the day, there are hard truths within the world, and the media portrays those events with a biased opinion. So how can we break down other people's biases to better, I guess, exemplify the full truth of what's going on?
Exactly how I just asked you. How did you come about that opinion? And then here's the tough part. Shh. I struggle with that myself. The tough part is listening, hearing how Zachary came about his opinion, and then instead of saying, oh yeah, well, I thought blah, 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 tell me more. And then shh, because Zachary has lived a life. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, Zachary, because it's probably half my age, and that's going to make me feel really old. But Zachary came about his perspective. I came about my perspective because I nearly lost our oldest son to suicide. So I come about this media literacy perspective from a very personal, emotional place. And had somebody asked me why I'm so passionate about media literacy, I would tell them that story about how we spent every holiday for 2 years in and out of psychiatric wards, trying to find a psychologist who admitted this destructiveness and the addictiveness of this. And we finally found one, and he was one of the first in the country to admit this is an addiction. And now that, again, we know what the problem is, we know how to treat addiction. Cognitive behavior therapy, in his case, a little medicine, but this is temporary. How you're feeling is temporary. This was mind-blowing to our son. He thought he was going to, be in a mental ward his whole life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If that was what he needed, we would support him and we'd be there to visit him, and we were ready to go down that route. But when we learned that this is temporary and it's due to a lack of media literacy and there's a solution, wow, that's what we think, trust me, is cognitive behavior therapy. That's what bridging conversations are. Share more. Let me hear how you got there. Tell me your story. And when we hear stories, what does that do?
Builds a personal relationship between the two.
Yeah. How can we not empathize when we hear a parent nearly lost her child? How can we not empathize when we hear your story? That could have been me. That was me. Maybe we have that in common. Holy cow. You voted for that person and I voted for that person, but we have this in common. Click. Bingo. That's how we have those conversations. And it's hard around the Thanksgiving table. It's hard when we're so polarized as a society. But if we, gosh, let me throw this gorilla out there. How did Donald Trump come to be like he, how did Kamala Harris come to be like she is? So now we can start to, wow, okay, so that's how he grew up. That's how she grew up. This is why this is important to them. I can align with that. I'm going to vote for that person. So that's why this is so important to you. Because now you're making decisions that align with your values and steer our country in a direction that you think is most important.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rosemary, can I chime in with a question, please?
Please.
I had the film gets into tech companies and kind of the responsibility or lack of responsibility of tech companies. And I think it puts a lot of onus on consumers of information, right? Of media literacy, which I think is really hard for a lot of people. Is there anything that that like, could they regulate tech companies in a different way that would change and alter the dimensions of this?
Yeah,
That
you're
would
gonna
aid
like
in
this.
media literacy.
People won't like it,
Mhm.
but if tech companies require that you pay with a credit card or at least register with a credit card or a driver's license or a form of ID, it would eliminate the bots.
Mm.
It would at least eliminate a large, they're going to find ways, criminals always do find ways. Why they don't use that wisdom to make the world better is a big puzzle that we'll never figure out. But it will at least eliminate a lot of those bots who don't have access to credit cards. Or you see in the film how easy it is to get a SIM card, right? 3 minutes to register a new account on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or any of them. But it would make it more difficult. If you live in a high crime area, you lock your doors at night. Why? A criminal is going to bang them down with a crowbar if they really want to get in. But if your door is locked, probably they're going to move on to the next car or the next house where it's easier access, right? If you have a dog barking. So that's what things that we do to protect ourselves. This is something we can do to protect ourselves. Require them to require identification. It's not such a big deal. You have to provide your identification to vote. You have to provide it to drive a car. You have to, it's not a big deal, but it's a big deal to protect, especially next generations. That's one thing. The other thing is legislation for the education. Right now, there are 17 or 18 states who have state standards for media literacy, education K through 12. It's a state issue. It's not a federal issue, although the Surgeon General has certainly voiced his opinion that we should have media literacy in all schools. Legislation does a few things. First of all, it allows teachers whose plates are already full to put an emphasis on media literacy in their classrooms. Because it's hard for them unless they're really passionate about it, unless they're in a very affluent school district. Will they adopt media literacy in their classrooms? It costs money to license our film. We give scholarships if teachers can't afford it. But anything new costs money, costs them time. This would legislate that all teachers would have to teach it. It also would legislate that in our state of Montana, there's a huge disparity of wealth. You can live in Bozeman. $1.5 million is the average cost of a home in Bozeman now. The average. So teachers in that district, they're teaching media literacy. They have all kinds of resources. But then you go up on the High Line, Conrad, Great Falls, You know, those areas, Browning, some of them are on reservation land, Native American reservation land. They're not getting media literacy resources. Heck, those kids don't even have breakfast. They don't have lunch. They're, you know, they're trying to get funding so that they can take gym classes. So it's really difficult for them to implement media literacy. Legislation would ensure that they get it just as well as the kids in Bozeman. So it would lessen that disparity. It would empower all students.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I have one more question, if that's okay.
Please.
So the documentary opens with the quote that then changes the authors of the quote multiple times. And I think that does a very good job of, I guess, conveying the overall message of the documentary, that you can't trust anything at its first sighting, I guess. Like, the first time you get that information, you can't just blanketly trust what it's being portrayed. So with that, why should we trust this documentary? Just
Thank you, Zach. That's awesome. Well, again, it's all about media literacy. If you're watching the film, question it. Be my guest, please fact check. Look up our experts, look up the stories. We certainly did. And then during filming, we not only researched stories that would create empathy, because you could do that. We have 40 hours of footage. We have 40 more hours, 40 more hours of footage. So we were thinking about, you know, should we do a docuseries on financial mis and disinformation, environmental mis and disinformation? That way we pull in all those different groups that have interest in the environment and finance and medical. That's kind of, you know, the ultimate goal. If you know, if we get some big funder come in and say, yeah, we'll fund your filming. But we did a lot of fact checking. We wanted to make sure that if we're reporting, you know, we did what journalists do, and on the site, on our Getting Better site, it has links to news literacy projects, quality standards of journalism. So we had journalists on our advisory board, Martha Groves from the LA Times, Jeffrey Gettleman, New York Times, many different journalists. And we said, would you fact check film? Our narrator is actually a professional fact checker. But before it even went through that, we had students like you. We had interns who went to work in fact checking all of, not just the stories and the experts, but also the script. You know, so down to the nth wire, we wanted to make sure that everything that was in the film was factual before we sent it to our attorneys. So we had attorneys who actually had to fact check the film, clear it to make sure that, you know, if we represented Coca-Cola in the film with a bottle or a bottle of smart water or something happened to appear in the film, that we didn't have to call them up and ask them if it was okay to make sure that their bottle was in the film. So it went through a lot of different clearances, but certainly, you know, that's with any media, you should definitely check who are these people that developed this. It was interesting in a screening in Missoula. We screened with the parents and the community. The night before, we screened with students in assembly. And we had a guy come, and he came with his, you know, I don't want to create stereotypes here, but this is factual. He came with his, you know, he served in the military. And he asked some very, very tough questions. And he said, are you trying to indoctrinate me to take vaccines? And I said, I'm not trying to indoctrinate you in anything. I'm trying to give you factual information. You make your own choice on that. You don't want me to go get vaccinated tomorrow for COVID? And I'm like, you know, do I care about you as a person? Of course I do. I have empathy, and I'm an extreme empath. If you told me a story where you said that you got vaccinated, made you sick, God, I understand. So don't do it. But we're not here to tell you you should or you shouldn't. We're here to tell you that think about it and check your facts. So check our facts. We love that.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions. You guys are so smart. I have a lot of renewed hope for next generation, because each one of these that we do, it's you just impress me with how smart and insightful you are. And not only that, but how caring.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rosemary, very much for coming and agreeing to do the Q&A. And I'm sure the audience, when they see this, is going to appreciate that tremendously. So everyone in the audience, give it up.
Well, I give it up for you guys. You guys are doing the hard work. You guys are tasked with making the world a better place. Share the messaging, come up with an impact campaign of your own. I'd love to share it. If you have videos or hashtags or anything like that, we'll share it on our social media as well.
Will do. Thank you, Rosemary.
You're welcome. So nice to meet you all.